Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our online event series. Today, joining us is Michelle Hennigan from Robert Half. Michelle?
Hi.
And she's going to be talking about how to ace a job interview, whether it is in person or if it's online. And I'm sure you're going to get great insight, as always, from Michelle.
Great. Thanks, Sonia. And welcome to everyone that's joining us for the first time. And a welcome back to anyone that was on one of my previous two webinars I've done over the last maybe 5 or 6 weeks. So I'm Michelle Hennigan and I work for Robert Half within our vendor management team. We have a number of lines of business. In our various GTA offices, which are about 8. And we also are celebrating 70 years this year. So it's an exciting year for us as an organization. Today, we're going to talk a bit about acing the job interview. So you've set up your brand online, which we talked about in the first webinar. We moved on to writing the resume and the cover letter. And today we're going to talk about actually getting the job interview and what to do when you do get it. If we can move to the next slide, Sonia. So we're going to run through a little bit of some interview questions. We're going to talk a bit about phone interviews, preparing for an in-person interview, dressing for success, the video interview, which is becoming a bit more common, and closing the interview and the follow-up. So we're going to run through a number of different strategies today. So our first question, how long does it take for a hiring manager to form an opinion about a job seeker? So it takes, according to 60% of hiring managers, it takes just 15 minutes for them to form an opinion about the person they're interviewing. Nearly a quarter of the respondents says it takes 5 minutes or less to draw conclusions about a job candidate. And this underscores the importance of getting the interview off to a good start. So that might include a firm handshake, solid eye contact, the enthusiasm and confidence you portray, being engaged in appropriate small talk, as well as, being dressed for success. So question number 2, is it better to schedule your interview in the morning or the afternoon, and does time even matter? And the answer to that is morning is the best time to interview. In a survey by our company, nearly 2 out of 5 executives said the most productive time for an interview is between 9 a.m. and 11. So pushing for a morning meeting may work in your favor. And the third question, what portion of the hiring managers ask their assistants to weigh in on a job candidate? And the answer, this might be a surprise to many people, 69% take their assistant's opinion into account when evaluating potential hires. So that might be their personal EA, but it also might be the receptionist. So this means you must be on your best behavior from the moment you walk into the office. To everyone you meet, because you never know who they might quiz with regards to your candidacy. So firstly, the phone interview. Many people have already had one of these. And if you haven't, this is likely going to happen when you move to Toronto or Canada. They're becoming increasingly common way to narrow down candidates. They're using it sort of as a first screening. So phone interviews to separate promising job candidates from those that might be unqualified or maybe have stuff on their resume and are actually not, that's not where their skills are. And they use this to choose who to invite in for an interview. So the phone conversation allows for hiring managers to quickly gauge a person's skills, their personality, their enthusiasm, as well as their communication skills. If communication is key to a role, this is a way to sort of screen the candidates into different categories. It may seem like a casual discussion, but you do want to be prepared for it. How well you perform in this step may be whether you get an in-person interview or you're being passed over for this role or potentially other roles. So definitely you want to invest into being prepared. Next slide, Sonia, please. You need to go back one. Okay, so the phone interview, be prepared. You may not always know in advance when a hiring manager is going to call, so make sure that you've got a list somewhere of the job posts that you've applied to, as well as the organizations, and keep sort of information on hand. Maybe that's, in a notebook or a piece of paper that you keep on you, even if you're traveling, so you're always prepared. Prepare for phone interviews. Sometimes you're not going to know, sometimes you will, because the time will be set in advance for that. So you want to be able to anticipate the types of questions you might be asked. Think about the points you want to convey. Set the stage. So you want to essentially find a quiet space, ideally to use a landline. I know many individuals only have a mobile or cell phone, so they may not have another option. So you're going to want to find an area where there's a strong signal. You're not going to be having ins and outs within that conversation. Sometimes in high-rise buildings, sometimes that can be a challenge. So you're going to want to test to see what might work. You want to be able to get your message across. The hiring manager won't be able to pick up on your facial expressions or your body language within this conversation. So you want to, as you're speaking, try smiling to give your voice a friendly and enthusiastic lift. Pay attention to your tone because subtle inflections can play a big role in the message you're sending. Are you clear, concise? Are you speaking too quickly? So this might be something you want to practice in advance with a friend or family member. And know the next step. When the conversation's wrapping up, make sure to thank the interviewer for their time. And it may be HR that you're doing this pre-screen. It actually might not be the hiring manager. So you may want to inquire about how the company plans to proceed and what that time frame might look like. So moving on to conducting the proper preparation. This is essential whether you're doing a phone interview or Skype or in person. You want to research the company ahead of time. This will help you connect your skills and experience to the needs of the firm. So things that you might want to make a goal is basic facts about the company. How big are they? Where are they headquartered? How many locations do they do business in? Is that just in Canada? Is it across the world? Are they public or privately held? Who are the executives? What are their various lines of business? You also want to look for press releases and whether they're in the news. Other information about like a new CEO, they had recent acquisitions, expansions, are they other changes in their leadership, important events. So you would definitely want to do some investigations in that. And as well, if you know who you're interviewing with, you might want to learn their role within the company, their background, and that might be via Google search, that might be via their LinkedIn profile. So definitely make sure to do that research in advance. And moving on to the video interviews. I've only recently started to conduct these, probably over the last year and a half, 2 years, with organizations, and this is becoming more and more prevalent. 63% of HR managers said their company often conduct video interviews. So it's a growing trend for companies to use Skype or other similar software applications to interview potential candidates. So this may be at the HR stage, it may be with the hiring manager, you might be doing this with agencies. So 63% is a pretty big number. Video interviews are common, definitely if a firm is looking to connect with someone that might be moving provinces or even countries as sort of an initial interview. So you definitely want to be practicing for this. But they can pose unique challenges when it comes to what you wear and your environment. So certain colors, and I'm actually wearing one of them today, pink, orange, and red, can cause glare on videos. And stripes and herringbone patterns can cause a moire effect. So you want to think about what you're wearing within these interviews and determine which outfit is webcam friendly by asking a friend to do a video call with you ahead of an interview. I know when I started to do video interviews with candidates, I know that I definitely needed to wear some pops of color and also check the lighting that I would be working in. So some more video interview tips. Check what's behind you. Your webcam will pick up a portion of the background, so make sure it isn't messy or distracting. I actually picked a different background today to do my webinar because there's a photo behind me as well. So you want to see, some people might have a bookshelf that's in disarray. Some people might have people walking behind. I've had those as well. So you definitely want to be cognizant of the environment that you're doing it in. Know your technology. Conduct a practice run with a friend to get comfortable with the software it uses. Make sure you know it's working, the ins and outs of how to work it, and any troubleshooting well before the interview. So the avoiding interruptions. A lot of times you might be conducting this interview at home where you have depending, you can control your environment, but if you have other people at home, that can become a distraction. So let others in your household know when you're busy and should not be disturbed. Turn off any mobile phones, your radio, your TV, email notifications, anything else that might produce noise within that interview. Close other programs on your computer so you don't have pop-ups that are distracting you. You definitely don't want to be multitasking during your interview. You want to focus on the meeting that you're conducting either with HR or the hiring manager or potentially a recruitment firm. Look at the camera. It's tempting to look at a direction opposite of the person you're interviewing with, but this is your chance to really engage with them and develop a bit of a relationship and rapport. So make sure your webcam's at the top of your monitor, look at the person, and don't sort of read from your resume. So you definitely want to know your resume inside and out, whether it's a video, as well as, an in-person interview. Sit up straight and smile during the interview, maintain good posture, smile. It really, demonstrates confidence and brings across a different warmth with the person that you are chatting with. So the next slide is sort of some video interview bloopers. Candidate's dog walked in front of the camera. One applicant picked up and showed off their family cat during the interview. A job seeker took his girlfriend's phone call during the interview. There's many, and I've heard many stories over the years. We're going to talk about dress a bit later, but definitely you want to make sure you are dressed head to toe. Because I've heard situations where people might not be and accidentally stand up because their computer needs to be plugged in because it's dying. So you definitely want to make sure that you are dressed head to toe for your video interview, just in case. So some standard answering standard interview questions. So here are some that you might come across. What do you know about our company? What is your most significant professional accomplishment? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why did you leave your last job? And what have you been doing since then? What interests you about this job and what skills can you bring to it? And what sort of work environment brings out your best performance? You'll find other questions online that you might come across. And I think sometimes it's really good exercise to, sit down prior to interviews. Even if you're not in the interviewing stage, print off your resume. Think about how you would potentially answer these. If you're a visual person, you might like a tool that I quite like for brainstorming called mind mapping, where you're jotting down your thoughts and things as they come to you. So you're prepared for this. But you may never be prepared for every interview question you'll come across. So you want to be able to focus your skills and experience as they relate most directly to the open position you're interviewing for, applying for. Confidence is key. You don't want to take it too far. You don't want to boast too much. You don't want to come across arrogant to the interviewer and as someone that may have difficulty collaborating with others. And you want to be yourself, be authentic. An employer wants to feel like they're getting to know the real person, the one that they're going to see every morning at the office, that's going to be interacting with their teams. They want to know that you can fit in. And you should try to guess what the interviewer wants to hear. And what they want to hear is the real you and what you can bring to the table. So some hiring managers will ask some off-the-wall questions in effort to throw job candidates off their game, or maybe to engage a prospective employee's fit within their corporate culture and their team that they might be joining. So you might be asked, if you were to have a dinner party and you could invite 3 famous people, who would they be? What classes did you like in high school and why? What would I find in your refrigerator? What did you want to be when you were 10 years old? And what was the last book you read? So sometimes people will include hobbies on their LinkedIn profile, on their resume. So if you put that you like to read, you want to make sure you're prepared to answer what your favorite book was, what the last book you read, and why, and how it impacted you. I know people that have been asked that question and then struggle to answer it. So make sure what's on your resume, you're going to be able to talk about if asked in an interview. So some tips to answering sort of these out of the box and may seem as strange interview questions is to think before you speak. The first idea that comes to your mind may not be the most appropriate answer. Maybe you need to take a moment or two to compose your thoughts, and if need be, ask the hiring manager for clarification. Take a lighthearted approach. Maybe use a bit of humor. I mean, you don't want to make a joke out of every question that's asked, so they may think that you don't take things seriously, but maybe this is something to show a bit of your personality. Remember your delivery. Hiring managers are taking note of how you formulate your responses to get a sense of your thought process, your creativity, maybe how you approach problems. So you want to remain cool and calm, maintain eye contact, and answer confidently. And don't throw in the towel. Even if you think you blew the answer, don't give up. The hiring manager may have a different impression of your performance than you do. The key to excelling is giving an honest, thoughtful responses while keeping your composure. So the next part of the interview is the body language. Um, and so this is specifically could be for in-person and video interviews. Watch your body language. A good portion of the message you send is conveyed not through your words, but used by your physical actions. So a weak handshake when you meet in person or poor posture, a downward gaze may convey a lack of self-assuredness. Crossing your arms may make you appear hostile, maybe disinterested, not engaged. And constant nodding or foot tapping may be nervousness. On the flip side, some of the good things, enthusiastic smile, eye contact, are effective ways to ensure you come across as, engaged and interested. Next slide, Sonia. And so it's always important that you go prepared with some questions you should ask. You never want to be asked at the end of the interview, do you have questions? And you say no. It's a chance for you to learn more about a company, determine if it's the right fit, is the position the right fit for you. Smart questions can impress a hiring manager by reinforcing your interest in the job or providing you've done your research. You may write these down to bring with you. So you might ask about what are the top 3 tasks the candidate might tackle once hired? Is there room for growth or an advancement? What happened to the person that was previously held the role? Ask the interviewer, why did they choose to work there? What keeps them there? What do they love about the company? If an interviewer and the hiring manager can't tell you that may give you some insights maybe to the corporate culture. And what is the company's long-term outlook? So you want to make sure that you ask things and take a genuine interest in learning the answers. And there are some questions you should avoid during the interview. Next slide, Sonia. Thanks. So some of those that you shouldn't ask during the interview, in case they hurt your chances, are about salary, benefits, and vacation times. Save these questions for later on in the hiring process once the employer has expressed serious interest in hiring you or potentially making an offer. So don't ask these in sort of the initial interviews. And then we move on to dressing for success. And this is super important. And I believe it's important for not only job interviews, but as well as informational interviews you might set up with an organization, any networking opportunities and events you might go to, and even if you're dropping off your CV, because first impressions matter. So choose an outfit that fits you well, flatters you. It should be comfortable, but not too casual. Ensure your shoes are in good condition, they're clean, they're polished, well heeled. It's a small detail, but this kind of things can make a big difference when making an impression. Select your outfits, avoid loud patterns, mismatched items, large jewelry, maybe that makes a lot of noise, distracting accessories. And avoid anything that's torn, faded, and maybe inappropriate for a professional setting. So this definitely means no t-shirts, jeans, hoodies, outfits that you might wear to the nightclub, sneakers, flip-flops. You want to err on the side of conservative style. I mean, for not everyone, that may be a suit, depending what a role you might be interviewing for, but I would definitely err on the side of dressing up more. You can never, worry about being overdressed, but underdressed, definitely not. So even if you're dropping off your resume, dress up, because if you're going to a very corporate environment and you're coming in jeans and a hoodie and you give your resume to the receptionist and it's a really corporate environment, they might not pass it along because you might not be dressed for what their environment is. So err on the side of caution and dress up. And closing the interview. You want to close it on a positive, upbeat note and leave the interviewer with good feelings about your qualifications and personality. Most importantly, you don't want to fall victim to the myth that by showing enthusiasm for the job, you weaken your chances for being hired. Play it cool. Playing it cool is good with a poker game, but maybe not in the job search. So you do want to avoid playing games such as bluffing. Don't tell the interviewer you need a decision soon because you have other offers. Even if it's true, sometimes it often backfires. Asking for interview critique. Interviewers are not career counselors, so I would not ask for pointers about how you could do better in the interview. Demanding an immediate decision. This will only make the person feel uncomfortable. It may well undermine everything you did within the interview up to that point. And you don't want to be asking for other contacts or job leads. You will go to job interviews where you may not be the selected candidate, or it might be a job that maybe you're interested in the company, but maybe the job isn't the right fit. So you want to ensure that you leave on a positive note, because you never know when another role within that organization comes up that might be a great fit for you. So next up, the follow-up. 66% of executives said it's helpful for a job candidate to send a thank you note following the interview. So if you're doing this, there are some steps to accomplishing several objectives. You want to express your appreciation for the opportunity to interview, reinforce your interest in the job, restate the value you may bring to that organization, and clarify any unanswered questions and address any concerns expressed by the interviewer. Plus, hiring managers seem to like it. I mean, 66% is a pretty big number. Email is definitely a preferred method, according to the executives we surveyed, as well as handwritten notes are also popular. So if you're going to send a handwritten note, you may want to carry something in your briefcase or handbag that you can pull out, maybe go downstairs in the building, take some time to write that note and drop it with reception to ensure it's received in a timely manner. Managers don't seem to prefer text. Only 4% of hiring managers polled said it was appropriate to say thank you through a text message. So that might be something you want to avoid. So some tips to saying thanks. Don't delay. Follow up with a thank you within 24 hours of the interview so you're still top of mind for the hiring manager, the HR professional, whoever you're meeting with. Write one per person. So if you're interviewed with more than one hiring manager, send a different thank you note to each person. Make sure the content of each letter differs slightly, as hiring managers will often compare notes literally. Be specific. Reference particular points from the conversation. For example, if the employer mentioned the position calls for strong knowledge of Excel, highlight the advanced training program you took. Highlight what you've been able to do. Maybe you've streamlined some processes using Excel. Don't ramble. Keep your message to a paragraph or two, or a few minutes if you're doing it via phone and leaving a message. And ask for a second opinion. Maybe a trusted friend or colleague should read over your written note to spot any typos, unclear language before you press send. Definitely, I would utilize professional written business English, so avoid text talk, short forms, and definitely don't include emojis. So recovering from an interview mistake, put yourself in the following scenarios. You built in ample time to arrive early, but Murphy's Law strikes and you get a flat tire. You're going to be late. So the solution here is to call the interviewer as soon as you realize you're not going to make it on time. Briefly explain the circumstances, provide an estimate of when you'll arrive, and apologize for the inconvenience. Most hiring managers will understand that an innocent and unforeseen mishap occurs. They might need to reschedule, but they probably won't hold it against you. But if it happens multiple times, then that might be a different story. Definitely, in terms of interviewing, public transit can sometimes be unpredictable. Traffic in Toronto can be unpredictable. Factor maybe 3 times the amount you would normally do to commute. If you get downtown, if you're coming for an interview downtown, there are many underground food courts and path systems that you can take time to regroup before your interview. So recovering from interview mistake number 2, you notice a stain on your neatly pressed shirt just before the interview begins. Stay calm and confident. While first impressions matter, a stain alone isn't going to sink your chances in the interview. You could even make a lighthearted joke about it, using the stain as a vehicle to break the ice. But I see you're drinking coffee. I'm wearing mine, you might say. You may gain some empathy, but I don't think it's going to make or break whether you get the job. And in number 3, you fumble in your first response by referring to the company by the wrong name. I'm sure we've all done this, or maybe calling the person by the wrong name. So maintain your composure, quickly correct yourself, and weave the right name into the subsequent answers. Stay positive and remind yourself everyone misspeaks at times, especially when they may be nervous, which is often the case within an interview setting. The most important thing to realize is if you feel the interview went poorly and you have no shot at the job, your perception of your performance may be different than what the interview assesses you. People tend to be their own worst critics. So swift recovery from a mishap can actually work in your favor. So just be cool, calm, and move on. And some real life interview mistakes. A candidate sent his sister to the interview in his place. When asked by hiring manager if he had any questions to ask, the candidate replied by telling a knock knock joke. And the candidate said she would really prefer a job offer from the competitor. And these are real life things that have been submitted to us. So thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar with regards to some job interview tips. Hopefully you learned maybe something new or maybe something to consider as you prepare for your next interview or your first interview in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was great. Thank you. I hope everyone got a lot of insight from it, and I love the bloopers that you had in there.
Yeah, we have people that submit them, so we pull them together, and sometimes they're shared in our own internal newsletter. But there are many examples that we receive.
No, but thank you for sharing everything, and I hope that people get a better idea of what not to do and what to expect. So we are going to take everyone's questions now. I'll give you a few minutes to type in your questions into the questions tab, and then Michelle will be more than happy to answer them. Michelle, you can turn your camera on if you want, so people can see you when you're answering questions.
Okay. Hello
So.
again. So yes, I'm wearing the color I told you not to, so I'm not sure if you're seeing glare, and I have a photo behind me. Um, but definitely there can be much more distracting environments. I've had people interview in their basement with clothes drying behind them. I've had people wandering back and forth throughout an interview, sometimes in varying degrees of dress. So very important to think about it if you're going to do a video.
For sure. So Nadudi has a question, wants to know, how do you get to know who will be interviewing you?
Sometimes you know, sometimes you don't. I know when we send candidates for interviews, we know who they're going to be interviewing for, so we would release that with their interview prep because we're provided, where they're going and who they're going to be meeting with, so they could do a little bit of research. I mean, sometimes you might not know, so you won't be able to do that sort of research.
Okay. All right. Is it okay to ask for interviewers' business cards?
Yeah, some will be comfortable giving it to you, and some won't. I know some give it, to candidates when we've had people go out. But it's okay to ask. But if they're not comfortable giving it to you, don't push.
And what will be the good time to ask them? Is it before the interview or after the interview?
I would say at the end of the interview, once
Okay,
you've completed it.
thank you. Um, okay. Uh, okay, so Neeraj has a question, wants to know what should be the criteria to quote a salary range in an interview? So when do you do that?
I think the salary will often come up towards the end when they're actually considering giving you a job. I mean, sometimes you might be asked by the hiring manager, so you want to have done some research maybe to get a range. If you're working through, recruiter, they might have an idea with regards to the range. And sometimes you're asked that when applying for a job too.
Okay. Adele has a question, wants to know what should I say when asked, where do you see yourselves in 5 years?
I mean, I think it's hard for everyone. I think you want to talk a bit about your goals. I mean, some people are pursuing, courses in anticipation of moving towards a particular, um, goal. So maybe, they want to be a research analyst or an investment analyst. So maybe they've graduated, they've done a bit of, work within the investment industry, and maybe they're talking through their goals. They're doing, their CFA, and this is the plan because that takes a number of years. Maybe they're doing some volunteer work within one of the CFA societies that exist throughout the world. So you want to talk through some of those plans. And sometimes people don't know. Careers evolve. I mean, people graduate from school and they do nothing related to what they've studied and kind of fall into new opportunities. Focus on learning and, where you see yourself. But those plans can be open to change.
Thank you. Namita wants to know, how do you explain an employment gap? What's the best way to answer, especially when the the gap was a result of failure to find job opportunities?
I think you want to be honest. You want to talk to what you're doing. I know through many of our vendor clients, they ask us. They ask about people's gaps in employment. So I am asking candidates every time I'm presenting them on a role what they were doing during that time. So, if you've been out of work for a year, I've been looking for work. This is what I've been doing. I've been, you know, taking my CGA. I've been enrolled in night classes. I'm doing some volunteer experience. But you don't want to just tell an interviewer that, you've been doing nothing if you're maybe taking just a year off.
Okay.
But be honest.
That kind of answers the second question too. They want to know basically how do you tackle the question when they ask you, do you have any Canadian experience?
I mean, you have to be honest. If you don't have Canadian experience, you want to relate back to your international experience and what you could bring to the table. But some people do get Canadian experience. They move here, they start a job, and maybe it's unrelated to their field. Maybe they've gotten a job at a coffee shop or a retail store, um, or they're working in another unrelated industry, and that is Canadian experience. A lot of people leave that off their resume. So I definitely would include it, and I'd talk to the skills that you're gaining. You're interacting with customers, you're providing customer service, you're improving your communication skills. There's
Oh,
still a lot of value in that.
okay, thank you. Is it okay to send a thank you note after a phone interview?
I think it's perfectly okay because a lot of people don't. I mean, it's, a nice touch. You can recap that conversation. When they're doing phone pre-screens, they could be pre-screening, a number of candidates to move them into a smaller pool. So you might be one of potentially 20 candidates. You never know. So that might help you stand out from another candidate.
Thank you. Vishal has a good question. If I'm interviewing for a position that is junior to the one that I'm really qualified for, is it okay to ask the interviewer for about chances of growth that are more senior?
I mean, you can definitely ask with regards to what growth opportunities might exist within the company. Is there training? I mean, especially for a company, if you want to join a company long term, you want to know those types of things. So I don't think it's uncommon to ask that sort of question.
Okay. And Ananya wants to know if it's okay to bring samples of the work that you've done before with you, and also do you bring your references with you to the interview?
Some people do bring their references. Make sure they're on a sheet separate to your resume, and that you have let your references know if you're providing them. Make sure to give them a heads up. With regards to work, some candidates do bring it. You want to be very careful. Sometimes candidates will bring work in person that includes confidential information from their past organizations. And that may be a red flag for an organization. I mean, that's confidential and proprietary to the company you worked for before, so you want to make sure when bringing that.
Thank you. Bonnie has a question, wants to know, can you give any tips about answering tell me about yourself?
I mean, it's kind of like if you've listened to some of my past webinars, it's kind of like your 30-second, your 1-minute elevator pitch. So you want to sort of get across what you do, a little bit about, yourself and sort of the energy that you might portray to potential hiring manager or HR person. So think about that interview, sort of that interview pitch. So maybe go back to some of my past webinars for some tips.
Thank you. Alfred has a question. So, say there's a panel interview and he only has the contact of one person. How can he go about asking for the other people's contact so he can say thank you to them as well?
I mean, that's maybe where the business card comes in. If you only have that one individual, and that's all you have, then you can write that person individually and thank him or her and their team for meeting with you. And ideally, if you know the people's names, you can refer to them, but you may not, or you may not remember if you don't have the cards. But I mean, in that situation, you might just be able to email the one person.
Thank you. Um, Faisal has a question, wants to know, again, a lot of people are asking this question actually. How do you answer the question about salary expectation? What if you're playing it too safe, or, what if the amount you mentioned is too high? What's the best way of going around this?
Well, I think you want to try to do as much research. There's a lot of tools online. We have a salary survey every year that you can go on and find. But if you're working through, especially a recruiter on a full-time basis, talk to them a bit about it. When they'll have some idea, but you want to try to do some research. You might give a range that you're comfortable in. Um, with regards to it, but often you may be asked in the HR interview, potentially up front to see whether you're a fit for that role.
Okay, thank you. Rekha has a question, wants to know, if you're not hired, how can you go about asking the hiring manager for feedback on your interview?
If you're not hired,
Yeah.
so you might not be able to ask that hiring manager directly. If you're working through HR, you might be able to ask them if there was any feedback. I know when I send candidates for interviews, if my candidate's not successful, I may not even get feedback with regards to that interview. So it might just be the candidate's the most qualified or the best fit for it is hired. So sometimes I'm not even able to provide it. One suggestion I make for candidates is when you complete an interview, do a little bit of an exercise. What went well? What didn't go well? What would I change? What should I have prepared better? Maybe in real time to think about it for future interviews, because it's very, very often in this day and age that you will never be provided with interview critique if you're not the successful candidate.
Yes, thank you. Sakshi wants to know, when they ask about your weaknesses, how many should you mention?
I mean, definitely be prepared for one. Sometimes people have a second one, but never say you don't have any weaknesses. But you want to focus on how you're maybe trying to improve it. So, if you struggled with time management, and sort of, prioritizing your tasks, it's how you've gone about it. Maybe you've started to write down or use your calendar to create, blocks of time, or how sort of schedule things. So give some thought to it in advance of the interview. So you're not in the interview and you're like, I don't have one, which is a quite common answer because I get it a lot.
Thank you. Ravi has a question, wants to know, how do you really understand the job skills that the hiring manager is looking for?
I think you want to refer back to the job description. So this can be hard because sometimes when you apply for jobs, you might not hear for many, many months back, and all of a sudden you get an interview out of it. So either you could keep track of the jobs you're applying for, maybe save the postings in your email, cut and paste them. When did I apply? And then, if you're getting called in for an interview and maybe it's not a recent application, talk to the HR manager. Are they able to send you the posting, which is going to outline the job description, the skills, some of the requirements. So then you can start to prepare for that. Because, yeah, I hear many stories where people are called 6 months later for a role they've applied for. Maybe that role was filled, maybe there's a new role, maybe they're in the database of somewhere. So it's okay to ask them, which role is it? Do you have the description you can share with me? I've applied for a number of roles. You just want to make sure you've got enough information going into the interview to prep for it.
Thank you. Anita has a question. It's a good question. What are the signals if an interview is going downhill?
I think it's hard to say because some interviews, especially in the temporary world, our time frames for interviews can be relatively short. I've had candidates who have been successful in a job in an interview that's 10, 15 minutes, and I've had candidates go for interviews that are an hour, that may not. So sometimes, not a short interview, depending what it is, may not necessarily be a bad thing. But in a full-time job, maybe that's a sign. If someone only meets with you for 10 minutes, you're getting the vibes, maybe that person's distracted, they're not making eye contact with you, then that potentially may be a sign.
Okay.
Sometimes in your gut, in the instincts when things are just not going well. So maybe after that, if you feel that way, pop, somewhere quiet and jot down some notes. Have a little notebook in your briefcase or handbag and pull it out and say, and reflect on it. So then that way you're more prepared for a future interview.
Perfect, thank you. Camille has a question, wants to know the thank you email that we write after the job interview. Should it just be one sentence, such as saying, as in, like, thank you for giving me your time, it was a pleasure to meet you, or should they include other things in the thank you email as well?
I think it's nice to include, maybe recap the discussion, talk about why you're interested in the company or the job, what you bring to the table. Because it's very easy just to write, it was lovely to meet you. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Best wishes. So it's nice to sort of recap it because if you are one of 10 candidates interviewing and everybody's sending the same interview, post-interview thank you note, it's going to be hard to stand out.
Thank you. Tulika has a question, wants to know how long does it usually take to hear back after an interview?
That is a really hard question to answer. Sometimes you hear immediately. I mean, even for us in the temporary world where things move very quickly, I've had candidates 2 months later been offered a job from an interview where maybe we think nothing's going to happen. And then all of a sudden everything comes to be.
Okay, and how about following up with them? How soon should you follow up after the interview?
I would ask the person that you're interviewing with when they should expect to hear something. So don't call them the next day because there might be many interviews happening within a 1 week period. Um, and then, when they give you an idea, then you can follow up there. If they say Friday, maybe it's the following Monday, but you don't want to be calling them every day where you're seen as really aggressive. Or calling multiple times in a day. People have screening. Receptionists get to know people's voices, so people keep calling one after the other. They may know this. So yeah, so definitely don't be, leaving a message, calling 5 minutes later. Yeah, so err
Thank
on the
you.
side of maybe caution.
Faisal has another question, wants to know when they're looking for Canadian experience, what are they exactly looking for? I mean, you already have the experience in the field from a different country. Is it the cultural experience they're asking for? What is it really that they mean by Canadian experience?
I think it depends maybe on the role. Maybe it's sometimes systems, sometimes it might be laws and regulations. I mean, it's a hard question to answer because certain systems are used across the world. So, for example, in the back office operations world, sometimes these people are using systems regardless where they're in the world. If you're in credit, sometimes, credit lending, even from the US to Canada, will have differences to various places in the world. So it really could vary depending on the organization.
Thank you. Alfred wants to know, for example, if he quit his last job because he wasn't too happy with the employer he was working with, and if that question comes up, how could he go about answering that question?
No, you want to be honest. I mean, relationships, workplace, personal, sometimes don't work out. So you want to be professional with your answer. You know what? Maybe you and your manager didn't see eye to eye. Maybe it culturally wasn't the right fit. Maybe it wasn't, the work environment wasn't great. I mean, you don't want to sort of badmouth the person you worked for or the employer, because that might be a red flag for an employer, thinking that you would do the same to them, but answer it in a professional nature. That it just didn't work out. And sometimes jobs don't work out. Sometimes jobs don't work out because it's not the right fit for you and your skill set or your values.
Thanks. Camille wants to know, is it okay to bring certificates, attendances for seminars or competitions that she's won to the interview?
I mean, some people do. So definitely, I know I've had many candidates that do and will show me their work. But yeah, like I said earlier, make sure if there is confidential client information, that is definitely something you do not want to be bringing. So.
Thank you. Song has a question, wants to know how do you tackle the overqualification question that comes up, like aren't you too overqualified for this job? How do you tackle that question when you're just looking for work in Canada to build that Canadian experience?
I think you want to focus on the skills you bring to the table, focus on, being, if you're a team player, and So many times people might be more senior looking, and may not enter the job force at the same level, but you want to be seen as someone that can, work in the trenches, is going to be comfortable doing the work. So really focus on the skills and how they meet that job.
Thank you. Christiana has a question. She's an engineer, but until she gets her engineering assessment and everything qualified, she wants to know if she can go for a customer service job or something like that, and how would that look on her resume if she did that?
I mean, I can't say whether she can or not without seeing her resume and what skills she brings to the table. But I think that when people move here, I mean, you've got to start somewhere. And at the end of the day, if you've got to pay rent, a mortgage, childcare, living expenses in Canada, sometimes you do need to take a job that may be outside of your ideal long-term career goal. And I think you just need to own that experience and what skills you're getting from it. I mean, you could be working at Starbucks or, for a year and a half and maybe getting a role after that, or you could be sitting at home waiting for a role. So I think, the fact that if you're out working, while unrelated, you're gaining skills, you're making connections, you're improving your communication skills, and you're keeping busy and you're motivated. So focus on, sharing those skills of what you're doing.
Awesome, thank you. Anya has a question, wants to know, is it okay to present references that are not in Canada?
Yes, because if you haven't worked here, your references will be overseas. So you want to make sure you've got that person's name, their title, the organization they worked for, email, telephone there, and potentially their address as well. And maybe have those on one sheet of paper that you print off or you email subsequent. But make sure you get those references prior to moving. You've got contact details for them, because what happens if they leave the organization you two were working at? You want to make sure you've got some personal contacts, because you may need those references even just a year or two down the line as you're gaining work experience here.
Thank you. Dariush has a question, wants to know, he had an online interview about 2 weeks ago and hasn't heard back from the company yet. Is it safe to say that he didn't get the job? And do companies actually tell their candidates that they weren't selected for the job?
I wouldn't say you definitely haven't not gotten the job. I would maybe do a follow-up. Like I said earlier, we've had candidates that have interviewed for temporary roles that a month and a half, 2 months later are extended an offer. So sometimes things can be happening behind the scenes with that hiring manager, with their team, with the hiring process. With regards to closing the loop, I think that really varies. Some candidates go for interviews and hear nothing ever. Some will get a response or get a form letter. I know for us, eventually we will get some sort of response through our vendor systems, but sometimes it's not immediate. When I work with candidates and I've presented them to a role, I let them know if they have not heard from me one way or the other, it means I have no updates with regards to their candidacy. Because for us, we don't know. It could happen many, many months later that we get an answer back, even for a no or yes. So it really varies. Don't take it personally if you don't get a response.
Okay,
Unfortunately, it does happen.
thank you. Dax wants to know, if you're applying for a job that's not really in your field, how can you relate the job skill to your resume?
Well, I think you have to look at what you do, look at what skills are listed in there, keywords. I definitely would recommend you check out my webinar from a few weeks ago on resume writing and the cover letter. So there's a lot of tips in there. But sometimes if your industry experience is unrelated, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult. For us, I work solely in the financial services industry, and it is very hard sometimes for candidates without experience from that industry to get in through this route.
Thank you. Sakshi has a question. She says, if you don't have a hobby at all, and that you're pursuing, and then when they ask you what you like to do in your free time, what's the best answer?
Well, hopefully you like to do something, and maybe it's just spending time with your family and friends. Maybe it's as simple as that. But if you're involved, say, I know we talked about in my past stuff, if you've done volunteer work, put that on, because maybe that's something you and the hiring manager might connect in. But if you're, be honest, but some people, they might have something that, for me, photography is a big hobby. So, that would be something I might say if I was posed the question. But yeah, if it's as simple, like, you're not doing sports or something, maybe it's as simple as, you know what, I really like to spend my free time with my family and friends.
All right. That works, I guess.
Hmm.
Bassam has a question, wants to know how would you answer the question if your manager had a good idea and oh sorry you had a good idea and your manager shot it down, what would you do in that situation?
I mean, you may want to pose what idea you brought forth if you're comfortable doing so. Um, and maybe, the reasonings why it wasn't selected. Because sometimes, there's policies and procedures in place, and it might not be able to be that easy to implement new things, especially if there's rules and regulations to the type of work you do. Sometimes it's maybe not as open to implementing new ideas and strategies.
Thank you. Nihal wants to know what's the best way to stay calm during an interview and not be so nervous or stressed?
I know this is hard because for some people, they may get nervous in situations, especially if maybe they're shy or a bit introverted, and maybe are not as comfortable, especially in panel interviews. I know sometimes taking a few deep breaths, a little bit of meditative breathing, maybe arriving early, sitting, having a calm space to sort of center yourself, that might be helpful. But I mean, some people are going to expect in an interview, you're going to be nervous. So, and I think as you get to know and sit in the interview and you're with the interviewer, I think you're slowly going to calm down um, in that as you build rapport. You think about when young kids, when they often meet new people, they're really, really shy, but then slowly within maybe 5 or 10 minutes, all of a sudden, they're chatting away. So I think that sort of, can be related to real life. So be yourself.
I know it's so hard to answer that question. Like everyone has their own nervous tics, and you don't know how to tell them not to do those things. I always say to clients, if you're a coffee drinker, maybe don't drink coffee that day because it might do extra jittery. But then maybe you don't want to be sleepy either. So I don't know if that's the best way to do it. Bonnie has another question. Wants to know: would an employer consider volunteering as work experience?
I think it's great experience. Sometimes I volunteered most of my life, so you gain experience. Sometimes you don't gain in the workplace.
Mhm.
So including that, you never know when there might be that connection. Maybe that person's been involved in an organization you volunteered for. But it's also a great way to get new skills. Like if you want to advance in a different area, um, and you're not getting those opportunities at work, find an organization you're passionate about and take on a role in an area that stretches you. It's a safe place to do so. And people will give you potentially a reference from that. If you're not working and someone's volunteering and they're out there, they're busy, they're gaining their skills, they're giving back, and someone's just at home doing nothing, that might set you apart from another candidate. You're not getting paid, but as someone that volunteers, you will get a lot out of the experience.
Thank you. Camila has a good question. Wants to know is it okay to ask an interviewer if they can provide some sort of training? If they're not too confident in the experience that they bring to the company.
I think you can ask them maybe as a question, if I'm selected for this opportunity, what sort of the onboarding process will training be provided? I mean, many of my candidates will ask me that. Sometimes I know, sometimes I don't know, with regards to what the plan is once they're onboarded at a client.
Thank you. Anita has a question. Wants to know at what point in the interview process are credential assessments required?
Generally, when you're getting to an offer stage, many companies will conduct background checks, and it really depends on the organization. Some are done in-house, some are done through a third-party provider. So it is a really good idea if you're moving from overseas to bring all your transcripts, your job letters, any sort of those official documents, because sometimes doing overseas checks can take a long period of time. There's time zones, especially if education or something's farther back, it can take time. I had one person it took a month for to get an educational check because it was a number of years back and they had to dig through probably, and now much more is online, but they probably had to dig through boxes to get it.
Thank you. Okay, so Does everyone have to get their educational credentials evaluated before getting a job?
I have a mix of candidates that have a mix of Wes or not. Just make sure if you have education overseas that you include the institution and where it's from. If you send your resume saying you have an MBA and there's no school tied to it, an employer or hiring manager is going to be asking, where's it from? Is it real? And I've been questioned on ones where I may have not caught them previously.
Thank you. Bonnie has a question. What do you do with your hands in an interview?
I mean, you want to maybe like you might have them under the table, you might have them clasped. I like to talk with my hands, as you'll see, and that's just my natural personality. Maybe just trying to get out some energy. Um, so yeah, so just try different strategies that work for you. Some
Yeah,
people are natural hand talkers. I am.
yeah,
So for me, yeah, I think it'd be a hard habit to break.
I guess you don't want to be too uncomfortable, like holding your hands together under the table either. So I mean, if I like to use my hands as well, I'm trying to keep
Yeah.
them underneath the table right now. But whatever works for you, as long as you're not doing this. Uh, Namita has a question. What's the best way to answer? What did you least like about your last job?
I mean, you want to be positive about it still. I mean, everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and there are parts of every job you might not enjoy. So be honest, but maybe talk about what skills you've learned, or maybe how it's gotten to you to the next step. But you don't want to say like, I hate doing this, and then there's a component of it in the new job, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, maybe this person was in the running, maybe I might want to think about someone else.
Perfect. Michelle, thank you so much for answering those questions. I can't even count how many questions we might have gone through today. Um,
Lots.
it was a lot of questions, so thank you for answering all of them. And I hope that we were able to answer all your questions. I think we did. If you still have any questions, feel free to write to us, and we will be more than happy to get back to you. So there's Michelle's contact information, and there's ours. So if you have any questions, online services at accessemployment.ca. If you want to stay in touch with us, the best way to connect with us is through our Access Employment social media, which is on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And there is a webinar there is a survey at the end of the webinar. We'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to fill it out. And thank you everyone for joining us again, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much, Michelle. It was great having you on
Thanks,
again.
Anya. Thanks, everybody. And if you've been on my other webinars, thanks for joining us for the entire series. Have a great spring, summer, and good luck with your move.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.